Hi everyone, in this video I'd like to show you some techniques for shading folds of fabric and how to get a realistic effect. I'll take you through the process first and then I'm going to share an exercise that you can follow along with to practice refined shading techniques that are going to help you get that illusion of soft, rolling folds of fabric. I'm going to start this drawing by making it about the size of my hand. That's not too huge a task when it comes to the shading, but it means I can still get some detail in there. I'm starting with a 2B pencil and I'm using it lightly to draw some construction lines. These initial lines need to be really light, almost invisible, and also at this stage I recommend keeping all of your lines straight. So you can see that I start by finding the straight angles of the subject. You can fake each straight line first to make a connection between what you're looking at and the direction you want your hand to go. And then when you feel confident that you've got the angle correct, then you lower your pencil and make a few strokes. I'm using straight lines and angles to help simplify the subject into simple shapes. We need to try and forget about making the drawing look like it's rolling folds of fabric and curves. Instead, we need to try to see the subject as a kind of a jigsaw puzzle of shapes that fit together. Simplifying the shapes to have straight edges makes that jigsaw puzzle much easier to draw. Before I move on from the straight line stage, I like to take a few minutes to do a kind of a spot the difference exercise and find any inaccuracies that need to be corrected. Once this simple drawing is as close as you can get to the correct angles and shapes, then we can start to add some curves. The straight lines are the foundation of the drawing, but then we can add the curves in alignment over top of the foundation. And then we know that those curves are actually going in the correct place. Usually at this stage, I'd mark out the shapes of shadow with a light pencil line, so I know exactly where to shade. I can do that here with this strong cast shadow, but most of the other shadows in the subject have soft edges and a smooth transition from the shadow to the light side. So I'm going to go ahead and just start shading the dark side of this first fold. I'm using a 2B pencil here, but I'm using really light pressure and holding the pencil closer to the other end so that the side of the lead just rests gently on the paper. This helps to create an even and smooth base layer of shading. Before I add more layers to darken the value, I'm going to soften the divide between the light and the dark. This is what will create that smooth transition and help build the 3D effect of the fold. The trick here is to use short strokes and lessen the pressure of your pencil each time you work from the dark side to the light side, so that the shading essentially disappears into the light side. You can use short shading lines to do this, or sometimes a circular shading motion works well too. As I move from the dark to the light side, I'm lessening the pressure. My pencil practically comes off the paper as I'm right at that crucial part where I want the light and the dark to merge seamlessly. One thing to be aware of is just how dark the shadows on white fabric actually are. They're much darker than we think. You could use a value finder like this one to help convince yourself of how dark the shadow is. And you can see here that when I match the value from the reference photo and I compare that same value to my drawing, the value in my drawing is much lighter than the photo. So I know I need to darken the shadow more. And we add a darker layer exactly the same way we did with the first layer. You might need to switch to a darker pencil. What you don't want to do is press a lot harder. With a darker pencil, maybe a 4B or a 6B, you can keep the same light, even pressure and build the shading up gradually. As with before, when the darker layer has been added, it needs to be gently blended with the lighter layer beneath it by using short, light strokes and lessening the pressure of your pencil as you move from the darker side to the lighter side. For each fold, I follow the same process. First, shading a light, even base layer, then gently fading that layer out into the white or the light side of the fold, adding darker layers and fading those out each time into the layers beneath, and then you just need to repeat layers until you get the value that matches the shadow in the subject. If you look carefully, you'll see that there's a lighter edge in here, just in the shadow where light is being reflected from the fold opposite it. I've lost a little bit of that light edge, so I'm just using my kneadable eraser to gently dab at the graphite and lighten that edge up a little bit. Now I can fill in that cast shadow that I marked out earlier. Again, I'm starting with a light base layer of pencil and then I can build that up with darker pencils from there. Notice how much darker that shadow is in the subject than it is in my drawing. Let's darken it up with more layers, and as I add those extra layers, I'm also looking for subtle details within the shadow because it's not all the same value. There's some slightly lighter and slightly darker parts. This part of the fold here is much lighter than the shadows on the other folds, but the process is the same. Shading a base layer, integrating it with short light marks and very soft pressure, and then repeating with more layers. And the same with this last fold here on the right side. Once we put in this dark, deep shadow in the fold here, you'll see that the drawing starts to gain a lot more three-dimensional form. That's because the range between your lightest and darkest areas in a drawing creates depth. The greater the difference between your lightest part and your darkest part, the greater the illusion of 3D depth and form. And that's why it's always important to put in those strong dark grey and black values. From here, I'm shifting from looking at large shapes of value to instead trying to see the subtle details of values within the values. I'm also defining some of the edges by sharpening up only the dark edges with a thin dark line. The value of the edges should match the value of your shading. So while it can be tempting to outline everything to make it look clearer, light areas should have a light edge, not a dark edge. You may have noticed that I haven't used any blending stumps yet, but now I'm using a tissue to gently soften the texture of my shading. I think it's really important to be able to blend using just your pencil. But for this subject, the fabric has a really smooth feel, and I want to reflect that by smoothing out some of the texture in my drawing. When you blend with blending stumps or with a tissue, sometimes the values get a bit greyed out. So it's a good idea to go back over and then add in any of those subtle values that might have been lost. From here, it's just about refining, looking more carefully, seeing what subtle details you can see that you might have missed before. So does it move slightly lighter in one place or slightly darker in another place? I hope you can see that a big part of getting a realistic result with shading folds of fabric is having patience to build up multiple layers of shading. It's tempting to speed up your shading or go dark straight away, but patience is really the key to building those subtle details and smooth transitions that create a 3D illusion. If you want to improve your shading skills and practice your patience, have a go at this exercise I've got coming up next. This is a lesson taken directly from my tutorial called Shading Folds of Fabric, How to Get a Realistic Effect. You've just watched a brief overview, but if you're interested in taking this class from start to finish and completing the drawing along with me, check out the description for this video and I'll leave a link there to purchase the full tutorial. Or you might be interested in joining my monthly membership. That'll give you access to this tutorial plus all of the other classes and courses available on the Pencil Room online website. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. You can leave a comment or even subscribe to this channel. All those things would be very much appreciated. And I'll see you in the next video. When it comes to shading these folds, what we're aiming for is something nice and smooth that feels rounded. And the key to that is getting this smooth transition in here. So the transition is where it changes from light to dark. We need to be able to create that with our shading. And you can see in this photograph that you can't really tell exactly where it changes. So that's what we're going to work on in this exercise. How do we get something that goes from light to dark without a hard edge in between? And it comes down to the pressure of your pencil. Now I'm going to be using a 2B pencil. If you find that you can't get a light enough mark with a 2B pencil, then by all means try a 2H or an HB pencil. What we're going to do with our pencil is rather than holding it in a normal writing grip, where you're exerting a lot of pressure down just with your fingers, we're going to hold it further back so that you're almost just resting the pencil on the paper. You should be able to kind of lift it up and then just let it sort of drop a little bit. It's just touching the paper. We're not actually putting any pressure down on it. And that's the sort of pressure that we need to be able to shade very lightly, even with a soft dark pencil like a 2B pencil. So the pencil is just brushing the paper. You need to hold it tight enough that you don't drop the pencil, but not so tight that you're pushing any pressure down onto the page. So nice relaxed hand as well. So very quickly we're going to draw It's one of these folds. It's going to have a long triangle shape. Doesn't have to be exact, this is just to practice on. Don't make it too big. And then down here we're going to create a little bit of an S curve. So from here it's going to curve down, and then up a little bit, and then down again. And that's just to help with the shape. To start with, when we're shading these folds, we're going to look for the light and the dark, which we've already done in that previous exercise. And then we're going to start shading in the dark. So even though I'm using this as an example, we're not going to refer directly to this. We're just going to think about it having a light side and a dark side. So the light side is going to stay white at the page at the moment. The dark side, we need to shade in this whole thing, but we want to try and keep it nice and even. So it doesn't go dark and light and dark and light. And you can do that by shading in patches. The whole time I'm keeping the same pressure on the page with my hand and my pencil, just brushing the page with the pencil, not pushing down. So you can see it's a little bit patchy, but I've kept the same kind of pressure, so I get the same sort of value. You might be able to shade straight up and down, but it takes a little bit more control. So I think these little patches are okay. And we're not shading right up to halfway because we want this space to be where we create the transition. So we've got our dark side, our light side, and then we're going to work on shading something that goes from dark to light. And we want it to go from dark to light. We want our pressure to go from heavy to light, or what it was to even lighter. So if we've got this pressure for shading this value, then as we come across, we're going to lessen the pressure until the pencil basically is not touching the paper. It just sort of lifts off the paper. So pressing down a little bit and then lifting up so that it fades out. So essentially what we're doing is, I'll do it quite hard here, I'll push quite hard so you can see, we're going dark and then lessening the pressure. You can go from light to dark if you want. You can start very, very light and then push a little bit harder as you go across, but it's a bit easier to start dark and then lessen the pressure. Obviously, we don't want to start that dark. We want to start this dark. So getting that same kind of pressure, just brushing the paper and then lessening the pressure as you come across. In this area where it transitions into the white, we can work on that a little bit as well. We've been using up and down in this exercise so far, but you could also use just little circles, very small circles, barely touching the paper to fill in any little gaps. So now we've got almost a transition. We've got light and there's maybe a little bit of a line there, that's okay. We'll put just a few little kind of feathery marks in there to blend this light into this value. Now we can add another layer over top and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go dark and then lessen the pressure as we come across, and it should just fade into that value that we already had down there. So each time I'm doing this, I'm trying to get the same amount of pressure, so I get the same value, and trying to lessen off the pressure in the same amount and at the same time. So you could be going this way if you want to, light and then pushing a little bit harder, light and then pushing a bit harder. And you might end up with something a little bit patchy. That's okay. As we go through the exercise, I don't want you to worry about patchiness or graininess of your paper. What I want you to think about is the general value. Have you got light, middle, and dark? And have you got a soft transition between them? Patchy is okay, but we don't want a hard line. So if you had something like, let's say this is a sort of a middle grey value, and then you have a dark value over top. If you've got a hard line like that, you're never going to get that softness of the fold. Anywhere you do end up with a hard line, maybe because you had a patch that was a little bit too strong, you can use those small circles. And the small circles, I'll do it a bit bigger over here, is literally circling your pencil on the page. I'm doing it very dark. I'm still keeping the side of the lead on the page as much as I can, holding it a little bit further back than normal. And you can, again, control the pressure. And you'll end up with little white gaps. You just keep working over top of those to fill in the white gaps. And the nice thing about this one, it doesn't have, a direction. Sometimes the direction of your shading can create kind of like edges or planes or sides that we don't actually want. We don't want anything to feel hard or like it has a corner in this. So those little circles can be really useful as well. Just going over anywhere you want to blend the light and the dark together. And you could keep building this up. So if you wanted this to go even darker, you do another layer and another layer. So we build it up in layers, but we also work on controlling the pressure of the pencil as you're coming into the light area. From here, if you wanted to, you could give things a little bit of a smudge just to smooth out any marks. Now, we won't do this until much later in the drawing when we've got all of the values in the right place, but you could start at the light side and very lightly just blend across or smudge across with that tissue so you get something nice and soft. Now, only a couple of swipes and then leave it, because the more you scrub around with this or a blending stick or blending stump, the more grey you're going to get. We don't want grey, we want light to middle to dark. When we move on to the project in a moment, just remember those key things: the pressure of your pencil, how much pressure you're exerting on the tip of the pencil. It should just be resting on the page, not being pushed down into the page. And that might take a little bit of getting used to if you haven't shaded or drawn like this before. Maybe on a scrap piece of paper, just move your hand around and let your pencil make some marks and try and keep them as light as possible so you can barely see them. That's the sort of pressure you want to be able to achieve. Not all the time, obviously, because sometimes we want to go a little bit darker and we can push down a little bit, but we need to be able to go as light as that to be able to get these transitions.